Welcome back, everybody. This is I Don't Know Her.
Hey there, this is Rita.
This is Amanda. This is the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of.
Bet you will.
And you should have already.
We gonna
Damn
help
our
you with
education system. Damn the patriarchy. So to start off today, I wanted to chat with Rita about a couple of things that I've seen over the weekend.
Happy New Year, by the way.
Oh yes, Happy New Year and Happy New Year to all of you listening.
Yeah, we are now in 2019. Our first episode of 2019.
Which you'll hear probably weeks from now. You're going to be like, geez, guys. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about Lizzo.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Lizzo's. And this weekend, she debuted her brand new music video.
Juice.
And it's so fucking great.
It is amazing. We just watched it again.
So I want to know, did you hear about the whole Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
Oh, my word.
So if those of you who are like, it's been weeks and you can't remember, or you didn't hear about it, she was in college in like 2010.
She, God forbid, danced
in like
in public.
So I mean, we're going old school for you, I don't know, Gen Zers or whatever. So before we did like the memes or whatever, there was this trend that happened probably between like 2007 and 2011 or 12, where groups of people like librarians, firefighters or whatever, they would do like a video. Mm-hmm. And then they would send it out as a challenge, and then other fire departments would do the video, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had participated in, was this sort of meme, I guess, where she's doing the dance from the Breakfast Club to the song Listomania. And it was like a university thing. So lots of universities did it, and she did it for Boston. So for whatever reason, it like resurfaced over the weekend.
Yeah, when she's being sworn in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
like almost to, people are saying to almost like a bad press.
Yeah, it was like to discredit her as being like, I don't know, silly.
Yeah.
It was like, did you never dance in your fucking lifetime? God.
And I saw it, and it's not like anything crazy. She's like in a t-shirt and jeans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at one point she's wearing like a pencil skirt.
But I mean,
and it's like, it's just normal. There's nothing weird about it. She's not being super sexual. Like it's just
very lighthearted and fun, and she actually looks adorable in it too. She looks
so adorable.
I know.
So the reason I brought this up, is because yesterday I was trolling Twitter like I do when I want to waste time, and somebody had mashed up that video of AOC with Lizzo's juice.
Oh my gosh.
And it is literally the best thing I've ever seen in my life. And they timed it perfectly too. So if you haven't already heard of either of these things, you must go out and find them, because it will just bring a smile to your face.
That's awesome. I was upset by it because at first, because I was like, men can basically, like, the president of the United States has been caught and has admitted to like sexual assault, but she can't dance. Like, I don't fucking get that.
Well, and like that one representative, one of the new women who just was sworn in, she said something like, "We're going to impeach the motherfucker." And people were like, that's not ladylike. You can't talk like that. You're a congressperson. And I was like, can I remind you of pussy?
Yeah. Well, also it's
Grab
like,
him
okay,
by the pussy.
if you're validating that this language is acceptable now, and that, oh, well, he turned a new leaf and he's in office and he's different. Well, they turn new leaves. They're in office now.
Yeah, exactly. And
so,
also,
fuck it.
the best comeback I saw to that was someone wrote, "It's okay, guys. It's just lady locker room talk."
That is awesome.
I can't remember which woman wrote that, but I was like, you're it. You're my star today. I love you for writing that.
Yes. And cheers to the House now being so much more colorful.
Yes.
And so much more diverse. That was a big step. First 2 Native American women
Ever. Elected to Congress.
That's a big freaking deal. That's a huge step forward from what I felt was a lot of steps backward.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just excited to see what their voices have to say. And there are much, like a lot of the incoming women who were sworn in this week are also younger. And I know I'm 35, which to some people probably sounds old, but I still feel like I'm underrepresented as a demographic.
Being younger too, I feel like it's going to be a little bit more progressive. And two, they have a platform and I'm like, use it, please. And I can see on their faces they know it.
Yep.
And so I feel like they're not going to waste it. It's a bigger responsibility and they know it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to talk about a woman that actually I had recently heard about. So you may have already heard of her or at least part of her story.
Okay.
Her name is Olivia J. Hooker.
I don't know her.
Yay! Yeah. She is the last known survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre and the first African-American woman to join the U.S. Coast Guard.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very cool.
She's got a powerful story. Olivia Juliet Hooker was born February 12th, 1915, to Samuel and Anita Hooker in Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Muskogee.
My whole family is from Oklahoma, and specifically the Muskogee area.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So I'm very familiar with this area. I'm very familiar with the topics that are covered in this. Well, not very familiar, I shouldn't say that, but familiar enough. So her family lived in an area called Greenwood in Tulsa, which was often referred to as Black Wall Street because it was a very affluent Black community. Like they had a lot of really great things going on in Greenwood. Mm-hmm. And the reason why Greenwood even existed in the first place is because when Oklahoma became a state, it was after the Civil War. They were a territory and then they were a state, and they followed suit along with other southern states and enacted really terrible Jim Crow laws. And one of the laws in Tulsa said that on any given block, you could never have like a white family and two Black families. It was not allowed.
Like they can't walk the same streets?
You can't have a house. Like you can't have homes owned by different races on the same block. Okay. And obviously it was intentional. If you're not familiar already, like you should definitely look up redlining and the segregation policies. So this actually backfired in Tulsa because instead of keeping Black people in poverty and segregated and unequal, it ended up becoming an area that was very affluent.
Do you think it was because they were able to form their own community and they worked well together?
There's that, which we'll get to, but also these laws were all enacted before Tulsa had a huge oil boom.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And it just so happened to be that a lot of the people who benefited the most from the oil boom happened to be Black people and Native Americans. I'm going to back up in history just a little bit. How did Black people end up in Oklahoma? Let me tell you about that.
Okay.
So when Oklahoma Territory was established, we've all heard a little bit about the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
So there were quite a few Native people who owned slaves because the tribes that they sent to Oklahoma were all southeastern tribes.
Okay.
For the most part. So if they owned any property, they often had slaves.
Okay.
And so they were all sent on the Trail of Tears. And when the people who survived... I had no idea
about that.
Yeah, and so when the people who survived made it to Oklahoma, a lot of the times they ended up, there was no more slavery, right? Like they would stop owning slaves, but they would then induct those people into the tribe. Mm-hmm. So there's a really rich and interesting history involving that. But at the same time, there were white people coming over to the Oklahoma Territory, and they also owned slaves. So when the Civil War ended and slavery was no longer allowed, and that's how there ended up being a very concentrated Black community in and around Tulsa area.
Okay.
So they all lived in this not all, but the majority of people lived in this Greenwood community, and it was a very thriving community. There were doctors, dentists, they had movie theaters, they had dance clubs, they had really nice schools. It was a thriving community. Yeah. There was a really well-established middle and upper class, and they were, taking care of their own. At the same time, Tulsa and Oklahoma in general we're seeing a large rise in members of the KKK. So it's estimated that by 1920, there were more than 3,000 KKK members living in Tulsa.
That's a lot for one area.
Especially when you consider the size of the area at this time.
Exactly. That is highly concentrated.
Yeah, in 1920, they have more than 3,000 members. I read one statistic said 3,200 that they knew about. And when you do the math, that's 23% of the entire population of that town.
That is ginormous. Oh, it's almost a quarter.
And if you consider that there were probably at least 10% of the population was black and 10% was native, that means the percentage of white people who participated in the KKK is astronomical. Really, it's unfathomable, but it's also not.
Yeah.
Tulsa was the area where it had the highest population of African Americans and Native Americans. So I don't think that's much of a coincidence.
Yeah.
That it's also where there is a high concentration of KKK members. So Olivia's father owned a really popular downtown department store in Greenwood. Later on, she was asked about like what kind of store it was.
Yeah.
And she said it was a very nice store that didn't carry shoddy things.
It wasn't janky.
Yeah. So on May 31st, 1921, a young black man who worked as a shoe shiner in downtown Tulsa went into the Drexel building and boarded the elevator that would take him to the only bathroom that he was allowed to use, which was on the top floor. A young white girl was the elevator attendant.
Dangerous situation there.
You already know where this is headed, right?
Yeah.
A white man outside of the elevator claims he heard a young woman shriek and that he saw a young black man running from the building. The man was 19-year-old Dick Rowland, just a baby, 19 years old.
19 years old.
He was eventually arrested for supposedly assaulting this girl, and an angry white mob gathered outside the courthouse. And it was very clear at this time there were a ton of lynchings happening in Oklahoma, so it's very clear what they were there to do. So the sheriff, according to what I was reading about, the sheriff wouldn't allow the mob to go in and get him. So they were pissed. This is right after World War I, and there were quite a few black men from Greenwood who had served in the army during World War I and came back to a segregated, racist America that they were fucking pissed about.
Yeah, thanks for putting your life on the line. Now get back.
Yeah, now get back in your place or whatever.
Exactly.
So there were reports that there were a group of World War I veterans who gathered their guns and came down and was like, protecting this boy. But, and I'm not sure if that's true, to be honest, because when I called it earlier, I called it the Tulsa Race Massacre, but it was referred to as the Race Riot forever. Okay. The nomenclature didn't change until like the last 5 years or so. And I really think that there were a lot of reports at the beginning that were intended to make it sound like there were bad people on both sides, to quote our fucking president.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was true.
Almost to probably, I don't know what's coming, I have an idea, but to justify.
Exactly, to excuse it.
Exactly.
So here's what happened. Olivia was 6 years old when a well-armed militia of racist white men descended upon Greenwood between May 31st and June 1st, 1921. They came into Greenwood, and as they were going, they were ransacking homes, they were lighting houses on fire. These motherfuckers even had planes, and they were dropping firebombs on the community. Yeah, they went to like rich white guys from the oil boom who had charter planes, and they fucking went up in charter planes above the fucking community, and they were shooting people and lighting their houses on fire.
So they were lighting houses on fire because they were pissed at the fact that they were able to get this boy, and
that they weren't allowed to lynch him.
That they weren't allowed to lynch him. Okay.
Yeah, just so we're clear on the gravity of this.
Exactly.
Talk about a response, an unnecessary response.
Yep.
So, they were dropping bombs, shooting men, women, and children right and left. People were just getting shot in their homes. They're coming through and they're ransacking everything.
That is a massacre.
It's a fucking massacre.
Those are defenseless people.
These Black World War I veterans tried to defend the residents, but they were greatly outnumbered. So Olivia, when she talked about what it was like when she was 6, she remembered the scene in a few interviews, and she described what it was like to hear gunshots, like being in a war zone, basically. And that she remembered seeing white men out the back window torching their garden.
Jeez.
And her mother really wanted to protect her and her siblings. So this is what she said. She was speaking to NPR. Our mother put us under the table. She took the longest tablecloth she had to cover 4 children and told us not to say a word.
That is terrifying.
Imagine.
I can't, because that would just, as a mother, that would break my heart and my soul. Like, just be terrified that your children and yourself are going to be murdered.
And so I know. I was thinking about Isai.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do. Or if someone came through that door and then it was there in your face. Like, I don't know what I would do.
And she talked about how prior to this event, the only white people that she'd ever seen were salespeople who would come to her dad's store to sell their wares. And they always jovial, and they brought her presents. And so she just had no idea, really. She'd been kind of sheltered from the idea of what racism was like, you know, because she also lived in a predominantly Black community where everybody was nice, and then the only white people she encountered were nice.
Yeah.
You know, because they had something that they wanted from her father, which was his business.
Sales.
So she watched as these men came into their home. They took an axe to the piano. They doused her grandmother's bed in oil, and they didn't light it on fire, though, because there were still white people inside. She talked about at one point, one of the things that really stood out to her is that she had a doll, a black doll. And it was like the first doll she'd ever had that had skin color like hers, right? And so her grandmother had handmade clothes for her doll, and they took the doll clothes and burned them in front of her.
The fuck?
And, just terrible shit. And they just destroyed their home, like pretty much everything in their home. This is what she said. I guess the most shocking thing was seeing people to whom you had never done anything to irritate, who just took it upon themselves to destroy your property because they didn't want you to have those things. And they were teaching you a lesson. Those were all new ideas to me.
Jeez. It's not even about things. It's about breaking your soul.
Yep. It's about saying you can't have, you know. She even recalled, like, her mom was a big fan of this one particular opera singer and had records. And they just took the records and shattered them for no reason. So these men, obviously, terrible people. They'd also destroyed her father's business, along with much of the rest of the booming Greenwood community. After the massacre, there were as many as 300 Black people dead.
Jeez.
10,000 people left homeless, and more than $1 million of damage done to homes and businesses, which in 2019 would be $32 million.
Oh my God.
The 42 square blocks of Greenwood were burned to the ground. Many of the people who were left homeless lived in tents for years after and could not find a way to financially rebuild their lives, which permanently destroyed the upward mobility of African Americans in Oklahoma for decades and generations.
And that was what they were trying to do.
That's right.
Yeah.
Luckily, Olivia's father was a real smart dude.
Awesome.
And he had a fireproof safe that he had managed to salvage from this ransacking and burning of their home. And inside of it was a bond, a large cash bond. So he was able to cash that out and move the family out of Tulsa. And they temporarily relocated to Topeka, Kansas. And her father stayed in Tulsa, tried to rebuild his store after a couple of years, though, when it was very clear that they weren't going to get any reparations from the city or from the state.
You're shit out of luck.
Yep, they were just SOL. So he eventually gave up, and the whole family moved to Ohio after that. Olivia said that after the attack, she had trouble sleeping. She would wake up screaming in the night.
That's called PTSD.
Yep. She was also terrified of going to school, because she had white teachers.
Oh. Well, yeah. Wouldn't you be terrified as a
I'd
child?
Be terrified.
Yeah.
Once they managed to salvage a few pieces of furniture and stuff from their house in Tulsa. And one of them was her dresser from her bedroom. So one day she was in her dresser, like getting on a shirt or whatever. And she found empty used artillery shells.
Jeez.
Yeah. So she was traumatized, obviously, by this event. And as anybody would. And I was reading something, I think it was on The Root, which said that that particular race massacre, or whatever you want to call it, was one of the worst, like most prolific killing of people of color in the country in history.
Wow.
And it's like, did you hear about that when you were in high school?
Not a damn thing.
Yeah, I didn't either.
No. Well, that's what this is for.
So things are about to get much better.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. So
She ready.
in Cincinnati, her father became involved in real estate, and he was able to rebuild some of their stability that they'd had in Greenwood. And in fact, during the Great Depression, despite the fact that it's the Great Depression, she attended Ohio State University,
Oh.
where she joined Delta Sigma Theta, which was a predominantly black sorority that promotes programming that serves African American communities.
Right
There are
on.
more than 300 chapters in colleges around the country. You don't have to be black to join. It just happens to be a predominantly black sorority. As part of Delta Sigma Theta, one of the things they were working on specifically was advocating for black women to be able to join the U.S. Navy.
Okay.
And they were kind of unsuccessful at that for a long time. She graduated from Ohio State in 1937 with a bachelor's degree in psychology and education, and she became an elementary school teacher.
Wow.
However, 1937,
Yeah.
we're heading right towards World War II, right? Mm-hmm. So with the onset of World War II, Olivia wanted to join the Navy, right? So she'd really been focused on this, like, they need to take black women. So she applied, and she was rejected twice on technicalities that were never explained to her.
Okay.
And I think the first, if I remember correctly, I think the first time she applied, it was before they accepted any women.
Okay.
And so she was rejected flatly for being a woman. And then the second time, it was after they had started accepting women. They had like a women's reserve or whatever.
And she's like, cool. Oh, wait.
And they were
black.
like, oh, we're going to reject you on a technicality. So she ended up appealing that decision, and eventually it was overturned, and she was accepted into the Navy.
Okay.
But she'd already been accepted into the Coast Guard. So in 1945, she joined the Coast Guard. She said the Coast Guard recruiter was just so welcoming. She wanted to be the first one to enroll an African American.
Oh.
So it was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like, we're just going to reject you based on nebulous reasons. This woman was like, I want to be the first one to sign up a black woman. Her recruiter was the woman named Lieutenant Margaret Teague. And she said this at the time.
Okay.
So just FYI, and the language was literally in 1945. She wrote this on her application.
Okay.
It was not easy for Miss Hooker to take the step of enlistment. She is the first Negro woman to be accepted by the SPARS and is in full realization of this fact. She feels a sincere desire to serve and further feels that she is opening a field for the young women of her own race.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is.
And she was only one of 5 African American women in the SPARS program, which was the women's branch of the Coast Guard. So she ended up going to boot camp in Boston, and she decided to stay and get further training. And then she was able to become a yeoman second class in the Coast Guard Women's Reserve, which was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So I do want to say that the Coast Guard says she was the first African American woman. So even though there was a class of 5 at the same time, for whatever reason, they're like, she was first.
Okay.
She's always like, oh, well, I was in a group. but according to
nice
the U.S.
lady.
Coast Guard's actual, like, their records, she was the first one. And you know, that's why I wanted to include what her recruiter said, was because she said this woman is the first, and she realizes that and is willing to take on that mantle. However, the unit that she was in was disbanded in mid-1946 after the war was over, and she left the Coast Guard with a Good Conduct Award. She also got a GI benefits bill.
Oh, nice.
So she used that to apply for and go to Columbia University's Teachers College.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
a great school.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And she goes there and gets a master's degree.
Ooh.
And she says somewhere along the line, she expresses an interest to stay there and perhaps go on to get a PhD. And someone either at Columbia or whatever told her she wasn't intelligent enough to do that.
No.
Oh, mind you, she spoke fluent German.
So she's multilingual.
Yeah. But she's not smart enough.
Okay.
So she ended up going upstate in New York to work at what I believe was a women's prison.
Okay.
It was Albion or something like that.
Was she in corrections or something, or?
No, she went into the mental hygiene ward.
Oh, okay.
Which is, so, because remember she has a background in psychology?
Yeah.
So she goes in to, like, help the people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. There she discovered that the women lots of them had learning disabilities, but she felt that they were actually more capable than they were being sort of pigeonholed. Mm-hmm. So she created a new tool and reevaluated them, and a lot of them ended up being eligible for further education and job opportunities that they had previously not been allowed to have.
Just that little bit of patience for someone to work for and with someone else can get them so much further.
And I think it's so admirable of her to be like, I'm going to work with women, like literally the most disadvantaged women on the planet are women who have learning disabilities and developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. Like, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. So this experience propels her to want to pursue her doctoral studies in intellectual disabilities. So she applies for and is accepted into the University of Rochester's PhD program.
Wow.
In psychology. Aren't you impressed?
Very.
She's so fucking impressive.
She's going for it.
So she's in a cohort of 13. And in her cohort, she is the only woman and the only African American. And the oldest.
Oh, jeez.
I
wonder if that was intense for her to be with like all white men, though.
Oh,
just
God.
from her past trauma. I don't know if that would have been difficult or a little traumatizing at times or triggering.
I would. Oh, can you imagine the mansplaining?
Oh. Yes.
The mansplaining she must have had to deal with every fucking day.
And she's like, boys.
Yeah. I did read somewhere that when she was in the Coast Guard, she had interacted with so many different kinds of Americans that she had previously not been exposed to, that might have really helped her in this experience.
Okay. Not all people are bad people.
Right.
Thing. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, like, if you think about the servicemen and women during World War II, there were just literally everybody from every walk of life. So she had interacted with a lot of different people at that time, and I think that might have helped her in this situation. She focused her research on the learning abilities of children with Down syndrome, and obviously made some really huge gains in that area. And she graduated from the University of Rochester with her PhD in 1961 at the age of 46.
Wow.
It's never too late, ladies. It's never too late.
I believe that.
So in 1963, just 2 years after she graduates, she is hired by Fordham University in New York to be a senior clinical lecturer, and she worked there as a professor for the next 22 years.
Oh, wow.
And during the time that she's at Fordham, she, because of her background and what her focus is on, she begins to advocate that the American Psychological Association develop tools and a whole division that is focused on these, like, on intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Okay.
And so she becomes a founder and advocate for Division 33 of the APA, which directly deals with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Right on.
Okay, so she works at Fordham for 22 years, and then afterwards, from 1985 to 2002, she served as a psychologist at the Fred Keller School in New York, which was a behavior analytic preschool and early intervention program for children with and without disabilities.
Wow.
She really, I just am so impressed by how much she advocates for literally the most disadvantaged among us. And it's just incredible what she did.
I wonder, so leading up to that, I wonder what it was that struck her about that.
Well, from everything I read, it seemed like this internship or whatever she did at this Albion women's prison is what really
significantly influenced her.
Yeah. And she'd also been a teacher, an elementary school teacher.
True.
And then also to get her master's degree at Teachers College, she probably, at least when I was going through college to be a teacher, you were required to do some of your hours in a special ed room.
Okay.
And those experiences probably sort of added up to, hey, I could teach these kids. I could teach high kids, right? High-end kids. But what if I didn't? Mm-hmm. What if I focused my talents and efforts on people who really need my help? Based on who she is as a person, I would say that's probably where she was. So she never forgot what happened to her, though, as a 6-year-old girl. So in 1997, she joined the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission that would finally, for the first time in history, study what happened that night in 1921.
How many years is it later after that?
So it happened in 1921, and it's 1997 when the commission is formed.
How can you even properly gather information? I guess through interviews and people who had been there.
Yeah, the only people that are still alive, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
A government report issued in 2001 when they finish. So it takes some years to gather everything, all of this evidence. The report from the commission says that it detailed for the first time the extent of the city and state government's involvement in the riot and in the cover-up that followed, and the total lack of remedy available in the courts at the time.
Wow.
So they finally admitted their culpability and responsibility in this, but they offered no reparations.
So, like, we admit it, we take responsibility, but we're still not going to do anything.
She's not done then. She's like, you motherfuckers, now we've got you on record. You did this shit.
Yeah.
So in 2003, she joined a lawsuit against the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma, which sought reparations for the survivors and the families of the survivors. So a lot of survivors died. And so she was like, no. Because as I mentioned before, this shit impacted generations to come. Generations upon generations of people, just like slavery did. I mean, when we talk about race in America and racism, we're not done just because we elected Barack Obama once, as if we didn't already know that from the election of Trump. So she joins this lawsuit, and it makes its way up the courts, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and they dismissed the case in 2005 without comment. And that was the end of that.
Tried.
So nobody ever got any reparations from Tulsa or Oklahoma for this horrible thing that they did. So she is just an incredible person. Yes, this is a big part of what formed her identity, but it's not the only thing about her. You know, she was in the Coast Guard. She worked with children with disabilities. She advocated for women with disabilities.
Very goal-oriented.
She's incredible. In fact, Dr. Hooker volunteered in the Coast Guard Auxiliary until the age of 95.
Holy crap.
In 2011, she was given the American Psychological Association's Presidential Citation. And in 2012, she was inducted into the New York State Senate Veterans Hall of Fame. In 2015, at the age of 100...
Ooh, nice long life.
The Coast Guard named a building after Olivia on Staten Island. It's like the place where the dining hall is. And that same year, in 2015, President Barack Obama was giving the commencement address at the Coast Guard Academy and directly honored her.
Oh, wow.
This is what he said about her. She has been a professor and mentor to her students, a passionate advocate for Americans with disabilities, a psychologist counseling young children, a caregiver at the height of the AIDS epidemic, a tireless voice for justice and equality.
That's awesome.
To have the president say those nice things about you. I do want to touch on one thing. He said, President Barack Obama, who I know is always right.
Okay.
He calls her a caregiver at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I tell you what, I researched the fucking shit out of that, and I couldn't find any other mention other than President Barack Obama's speech. I really couldn't. I looked everywhere. There was nothing on her.
Wow. I don't
I was
know.
like, what do you mean she was a caregiver during the AIDS epidemic? I want to know that information. That's really pertinent to my identity. I want to know.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where you would find that. She doesn't have like a foundation or anything, does she? Or no?
So on November 11th, 2018, Google, I know, Google honored her on Veterans Day with the Google Doodle.
Oh, cool.
She died just 10 days later
wow.
at the age of 103.
Oh my God.
She had no surviving family members. She never married. I did read somewhere that she had a fiance who died of a heart attack.
Oh.
But she otherwise had no children, no family. Everybody else had died. She did have a goddaughter named Janice Porter, who said that Dr. Olivia Hooker died peacefully at home in White Plains, New York.
That sounds like a very well-rounded, just beautiful story.
Oh, yeah.
What a good life.
What a long, industrious, important, incredible life.
Accomplished.
She was so accomplished.
Dr. Hooker, you're the shit.
Right? And I knew about her because I remembered when she died.
Okay.
Because it was like 2 months ago. But no, I was on The Root. Actually, I had been on Facebook first.
Mm-hmm.
And the local paper here in Spokane is called the Spokesman Review. I follow them on Facebook. And so on my news feed, an article showed up that said something like the oldest survivor of the Tulsa Race Riots died. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I didn't read the Spokesman's article.
Yeah.
And later on, I opened up The Root because I read The Root every day, which if you're not already on there, you should read The Root. And I was reading and I saw this, Dr. Olivia J. Hooker died. And so I opened up the article and the very first line says, as reported by the Spokesman Review.
Oh,
it's like,
what?
And that's the reason why it stuck out in my mind is because I remembered that The Root linked to the Spokesman Review article.
Okay.
And I thought, how weird. I mean, this is about a woman who lived in Tulsa and New York. Like,
yeah.
Why?
Where's The Root based out of? Well, I know it's online, but...
Yeah, they kind of are all over the place.
All over the place.
But they're part of the Gizmodo Media Group, which is based in New York. But they also they acquired Very Smart Brothers a few years ago, which was a blog for Black men.
Okay.
And one of those writers is one of my favorite writers, is from Pittsburgh,
Nice.
which is where my wife is from. So therefore, like every time he writes an article about Pittsburgh, I'm like, oh my God. And I share it with Abby and she goes, okay, cool.
She's like, been there, done that.
I wanted to just say where I got all of my info from on Dr. Hooker. I used Wikipedia because it had a pretty succinct, so I could follow the timeline. But I really didn't use a lot from Wikipedia. I actually ended up using quite a few articles that were archived.
Oh.
Through what's it called? The Wayback Machine. There we go. So I used Wikipedia, but I also used a defunct website, or at least the one I was using was from the Wayback Machine, called Psychology's Feminist Voices.
Oh.
And I also used the American Psychological Association's interview with her after she got that Presidential Medal Award. I used the New York Times obituary. I used the article that The Root wrote about her. I used Newsweek and also an article on the BBC.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Thanks.
I enjoyed that.
I thought she was just so amazing and wonderful.
Nice.
And I was very excited about her.
Oh, I like that a lot. She texted me before and she's like, oh my God, this girl's a badass.
It's like, she's so amazing. So what do you got for me? What are you going to throw my way?
Oh, I'm excited about this one because this one hits home for me culturally. And I have a feeling you probably know her.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. But
could this be the first one I know?
You know? Dolores Huerta.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know that much about her. I know a little bit about her, but not a lot.
Not a lot. So Dolores was an American labor leader and civil rights activist. She was born Dolores Fernandez in April 1930 in a small mining town in Dawson, New Mexico. Dolores was the second child and only daughter of Juan and Alicia Fernandez. And I'm going to go a little bit much into her parents, because I feel like what her parents did really molded why she did what she did with her life. Her father, Juan, was a farm worker and a coal miner. In a migrant labor force, he harvested beets in Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. So traveling migrant farm worker. And my family were migrant farm workers as well. Her parents' marriage was troubled, she said, and when Dolores was a toddler, they split up. Her parents divorced. Her mother moved her 2 brothers and herself to Las Vegas first to find work, and then she ended up moving to Stockton, California, where she found work, and she ended up spending like the rest of her childhood. She remained in touch with her father, but she seldom saw him. She said in her youth that her father would tell her stories about union organizing, and she took pride in the fact that he stayed in New Mexico. He became a union activist himself. He ran for and won a seat in the state legislature in 1938, which I didn't know.
I didn't know that.
And he became a college graduate. So he was able to, I mean, obviously.
He went from a migrant worker to a fucking legislator.
Yes.
That's impressive.
With a degree.
Yeah, with a degree. That's really, really impressive.
That is amazing. Her mother, Alicia, was a single mother raising 3 kids during the Depression, which that doesn't sound like fun. She worked as a waitress during the day, and she worked in a cannery at night. Her father, he's got an awesome name, by the way, Herculano. I know, right?
Like Hercules.
Herculano watched the children while Alicia worked, which is not uncommon at all. Dolores said it was hard times, but her family provided a loving and happy household. Her grandfather, who called her 7 tongues, because she talked too damn much, she was very close to. And this is a quote from Dolores. She said, "My grandfather kind of raised us. He really was our father. His influence was really the male influence in my family." So her mother worked her ass off, and she ended up being the owner of a 70-room hotel.
How did she become the owner?
It was really hard for me to find how she became the owner, but as she was working as a waitress, she ended up moving up to managing the restaurant. Then she remarried. Okay. And she was able to acquire this hotel, but this hotel was not fancy. Dolores quoted it as being on the edges of Skid Row. So it's, there's no high tea going on there or anything like that.
Unlike Dr. Hooker's father's very nice store that did not carry shoddy things.
She remembers that, her mother remarried and had another daughter. So Dolores got a half-sister. She said her mother was kind and compassionate to people. She welcomed low-wage workers in the hotel at low rates, and at times, if they couldn't do it, she waived the fee entirely. She was active in community affairs. She was involved in numerous civic organizations and their church. Her mother embraced the agricultural community and promoted acceptance of the cultural diversity that it brought. So most of these migrant workers were primarily Mexican, but a lot were Filipino, African American, Japanese, and Chinese, and Jewish.
Whoa, that's a big cross-section of people.
Is a mixing, melting pot. Dolores spoke of the community of how, if they did have Jewish families, they lived in Stockton. The bakeries were Mexican. There was, the dry cleaners was something else. And the community was very, very diverse. So she grew up around a lot of different people. Dolores and her brothers helped out at both establishments. So at the restaurant and at the hotel. And she said it helped her appreciate all different kinds of people. This is a quote from her as well. She says, "When we talk about spiritual forces, I think that Hispanic women are more familiar with spiritual forces. We know what fasting is, and that is part of our culture. We know what relationships are, and we know what sacrifice is." So she witnessed this with her mother, and just that reaching that hand out to people in need. It's not that hard. So Dolores said her mom's independence and entrepreneurial spirit was the primary reasons why she became a feminist. It provided a foundation for her own nonviolent, strongly spiritual sense. I love what she says about her mother here, too. She says, "The dominant person in my life was my mother. She was a very intelligent woman and a very gentle woman. My mother was always pushing me to get involved in all these youth activities. She wanted us to make something of ourselves. We took violin lessons. I took piano lessons. I took dance lessons. I belonged to the church choir. I belonged to the church youth organization. I was very active Girl Scout from 8 to 18. So her mom was like, "You're going to do something."
You just reminded me of something I forgot to say.
Oh, what?
Dr. Hooker was at one point a Girl Scout leader, and she was like the only African American in the town.
Oh my God.
I just thought that was like this weird factoid that I totally didn't write down because I was like, okay, she was a Girl Scout leader. But as soon as you said that Dolores was a Girl Scout, I was like, Scout. I got to tie that in.
That's cool. I like that. I like that they were both Girl Scouts. They were leaders. That's why. She was a good student. She was very diligent with her studies. She was an avid reader, really good writer. She even won second place in a national essay contest.
I would love to read that essay.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Isn't that second place in a national essay contest?
I was published in high school.
What? Oh, I knew you were published.
In a national book.
Look at this, y'all.
I was like, oh my God, I'm so special. My mom, like I did all of it on my own, right? Like we're talking about like her mom was her guiding force.
Yeah.
Mine was like, what is this even about?
What's this book learning?
She had just no interest. To this day, I don't think my mother has ever read anything I've published.
Oh, I'll read it. I'll make my mom read it. Somebody's mom is going to read it. She was also a majorette, which I never knew.
Like the drum,
a majorette with the batons.
Okay.
Yeah. So batons and like synchronized dance movements and stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
Aren't those also called like drum majors now, or
I don't
something?
know.
I don't know.
I had to look up what a majorette was because I didn't know what it was.
Because I think they call them drum majors now.
Okay.
Because majorette was very like gendered.
Oh, okay. Got it.
But I could be completely wrong, and I'll hear about it at social media.
Tell us, let us know. She was also involved in multiple school clubs, very active in school.
Shocking. I mean, she was only in like 17 different things.
She says she did encounter, of course, racism targeted towards her because she was Mexican, and she saw it with other Mexicans and Mexican Americans in school.
Yeah, and remind me of the year when she's in high school.
So she was born in 1930. So this
it'd be
is
like
the
45.
1940s, 1945.
45
yes.
should be 15, which is also when World War II is ending.
Yes. She was looked down upon, of course, because of her race, and because also of the hotel that her mother owned, because it
wasn't a nice hotel. Yeah.
It wasn't a nice hotel, and she was in company with migrants and low-income people. At one point, she was even accused by her own teacher of stealing homework because the teacher was convinced a Mexican couldn't produce such good work.
Oh my God, that fucking pisses me off. Actually, yeah. I think I remember that. I had a student, so I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I used to teach 8th grade, and we used to do a unit on the 60s, and I would always put Dolores Huerta on my list of people to study, like, because they would always write a paper at the end, the 8th graders would. And a couple of years ago, I had a student named Mariana who did Dolores, and I remember that she wrote that in the paper, and I remember that when she found that fact somewhere, she like brought it up to me. She was like, "Can you believe this?
What is this bullshit?"
And I'm just full of factoids today. I was on the route, reading Olivia Hooker's stuff, and they had just posted an article like 2 days ago about this senior girl who, like the SAT board, like college board or whatever that does the SATs, said that they thought she cheated because her score was too high for a black girl.
The hell is that? I do not like, and I've actually met this in my own life, a constant resistance just because the color of your skin.
It's so bizarre to me. Like, what do you think happens?
I don't know.
Like, do you think that like skin color somehow like invades your brain?
I don't know. I literally had at work the other day a customer that said, "Well, you don't sound Mexican." And I was like, "Well, how?
Oh, God.
What? So does that mean that I'm not? That means because of your opinion of me,
your prejudices,
that you're taking my identity away. That makes a lot of fucking sense."
Nicole Byer talks about that on her podcast, Why Won't You Date Me, which I highly recommend. It's a fun podcast. But she talked about how people would often tell her she didn't sound black. And she was like, well, look at my skin. I think I'm black.
I think I am.
I think it doesn't matter what I sound like.
Exactly. So that pissed me off too. Was reading that.
Really pisses
your
me
teacher
off.
is supposed to be
your champion, your support.
Exactly.
They're supposed to want you to succeed because good teachers who produce good students
produce a good
praise.
Society. Anyways, fuck that teacher.
Yeah, fuck that teacher. And any teacher who's like that. And there are a lot of them out there.
There are, actually, still to this day.
I know. It's terrible.
So experiencing racial bias and marginalization during her childhood built in her a belief that society needed to be changed. And unfortunately, you got to go through some of that stuff to really feel it or see it, you know.
Yeah.
She graduated from Stockton High School in 1947. And breaking the norm, especially for being a Latina at that time, she went to college. She attended the University of Pacific's Stockton College, which later became San Joaquin Delta Community College. During this same time, she meets a man, and his name is, this is a terrible name, Ralph Head. I'm sorry, Dolores. It's just not my jam. But she meets Ralph. She marries him. They have 2 daughters together, Celeste and Lori, and she leaves her studies briefly to raise her kids. Not very long, though. She works numerous jobs trying to find something that she can connect with. She did a lot. So I'm going to name a couple. These jobs were managing the neighborhood grocery. She was a secretary to the commander in charge of public works at the Naval Supply Base.
Okay.
She was a records and identification keeper at the local sheriff's office. And it's like, those are all very, like, you're going to have to be pretty organized, I think. Yeah. But she's just like, nah. She left all of them. She tried it. No. She tried it. No. She also left her husband. She got divorced. She returned to college, and she earned a provisional teaching credential. So I had to look that up, too, as well. I feel like you would probably better explain it than I would.
Generally, when you get a provisional, it's because there's one piece missing that you need to complete. Or in the case of the state of Washington, when you first start teaching, you're automatically provisional.
Okay.
Until you have taught for 3 years.
Okay.
And then they'll say, okay, well, I guess you haven't been fired yet, so you can be a full teacher. Is this
almost like a probationary?
Yeah, it's like a probationary situation.
That's what I gathered. I looked it up because I was like, what the fuck is this? I don't know.
And it could be because originally she was going to community college, right?
Yes.
So did she get her teacher's certificate from a community college or from a university? Because that might be the situation.
And she also earned her AA as well.
Yeah, which that would be from community college.
Okay.
So it might have been that maybe there was like some stipulation that she needed to pass some test or something.
Okay.
In order for it to be a full teaching certificate. Or it could just be, like I said, you have to wait 3 years. And then you're a full teacher.
Then you become a real teacher.
I'm a real boy.
Yeah. Well, she begins teaching elementary school, but it only lasts for a few months. While she was teaching, she saw students that would come to school with empty stomachs, hungry, can't focus. Some of them had bare feet, and she just couldn't take it. She said she had to do something to correct this economic injustice. To quote her, she said, "I couldn't tolerate seeing kids come to class hungry and needing shoes. I thought I could do more by organizing their farm worker parents than by trying to teach their hungry children."
Oh, very cool.
Very cool. So this is 1955. Dolores becomes an organizer serving at the Stockton Community Service Organization, which is the CSO. The CSO is a Mexican-American self-help group that first organized in LA in later years after World War II, and then it spread across California and the Southwest. So while at the CSO, she was active in civic and educational programs, of course, because, you know, she's going to be involved in multiple things. She's used to it. These programs included voter registration drives, setting up citizenship classes, lobbying local governments for barrio improvements. And she was a big advocate for putting, like getting your license or voter registration or even ballots being in Spanish. So like multilingual platforms. The CSO soon hired her to handle similar duties in a group at the state level in Sacramento, which is really cool.
Yeah.
During this time, Dolores met and married her second husband, Ventura Huerta, which is a way cooler name,
Yeah.
who was also involved in the community affairs. She had 5 kids with this guy.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
And then she had a 2 from the previous marriage.
Yeah, so now she's
So
got 7
children. Jesus.
I know.
That's a lot of kids.
Unfortunately, this relationship also deteriorated.
Is there any information about why her marriage has ended?
This
Is it
one
because
here-
she's such a motivated person?
I think so.
Because there are lots of men who get real intimidated by that.
Yeah, I feel like at times from some situations I've seen, they get really like excited because it's a really hardworking woman and she's passionate, and then they're like, oh, well, she's never there.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes like your Achilles heel.
Yeah.
It's the thing that makes you, but also the thing that people, especially, I don't know. I'm generalizing here. Sorry. I think that there are men, though, that get very intimidated by women who are driven, motivated, ambitious, loud, opinionated, and they can't take it. They think they can when they're dating.
Yeah.
And then once they're in a committed relationship, they're like, actually, I just want you to stay home and cook for me.
Yeah. And I think having 5 children with him, probably the tension of she's not going to stay home. She's going to do what she's going to do. And that I can imagine.
And we talked about that with when we did Junko Tabe, about how, no one ever questioned the men who went away to mountain climb.
Exactly.
It's like, parenting should be a 50-50 job.
Exactly.
And sometimes that actually will shift, right? Like,
yeah.
If one person in the partnership has something really big going on that's really consuming their time, then, that balance might shift to a 70-30 for that time. And then it might switch back to a 70-30 for the other partner. It should be a give and take.
My husband would always get annoyed when our son was a baby because he always did. Honestly, for like the first year of that kid's life, I didn't bathe him. Nick did. Like he always did bath time and I would sleep. And so that was really nice because he loved bath time. He'd get like a little special tub and he had like lavender oil and he would take his time, and he's a good father. And he would always like, TMI, but if there's any moms out there, you know this, I would always poop when he breastfed. So I'm like sitting there and he's eating on one side and shitting out the other. And I'm like, oh dear God, it's like my body hurts and my boob hurts and I've got milk all over me. So he'd pick him up and he'd change his diaper, and he would hear more often than not comments of, ooh, you have to change the dirty diaper, like tease him. And he goes, yeah, I'm his father. That's okay. He'd get annoyed.
To me, that is that sort of toxic masculinity, that patriarchal shit. It harms men as much as women. When you're a father and you are taking care of your child while the mother is away, it's not called babysitting.
I was just going to say that too, because I would go somewhere and they're like, well, who has Isai? And I was like, oh, Nick does. And they would say, oh, was he babysitting tonight? And he'd say, no, I'm his father.
I'm fathering tonight.
And
that's
he'd
my
get
job.
Really bothered. Yeah.
Anyway, we're going on
we're
whole
ranting.
Tangent, but I do think that that's something important to say.
It is. There's a quote of how this marriage ended. So it says, this marriage, they had 5 kids. It deteriorated because of disagreements over Dolores juggling domestic matters, childcare, and civic activism.
Yep, that's exactly
what we were
That's
doing.
the nice way of saying
Exactly.
he couldn't take her ambition.
A quote from her said, I knew I wasn't comfortable in a wife's role, but I wasn't clearly facing the issue. I hedged. I made excuses. I didn't come out and tell my husband that I cared more about helping other people than cleaning the house and doing my hair. So.
And which is something that only women are asked to do.
Exactly.
Like men are never asked to
choose,
come out and say, my career matters to me. Mm-hmm. They don't have to say that. Women have to say, my career matters to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It just seems like
she probably
such a double
thought
standard.
she could juggle it. She probably put the pressure upon herself to do it all, and she couldn't because she's human. So Dolores struggled to balance her failing marriage, her family, her job with her commitment to social activism. And she found herself really drawn to the plight of the Mexican-American farm workers. So soon after her divorce, she joined the Agricultural Workers Association, which is the AWA, a Northern California community interest group, which had been founded by a local priest and his parishioners. He would later merge with the American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations.
The AFL-CIO.
Yes, easier said. AFL-CIO.
Can I tell you a fun fact that
Sure.
you probably wouldn't know about me?
What?
So my great-great-grandfather, I think,
All right.
he was the founder and president of a farmers union that was eventually absorbed by the AFL-CIO, but initially they were the competitors of each other.
Oh.
And his was the first racially inclusive farmers union in the country.
Wow.
And that's what pressured the AFL-CIO to incorporate people of color. And then he eventually ran for the governor of Arkansas twice as a socialist.
Whoa. That is really awesome. I like how this is all tying together, by the way.
No, I feel like we're having like a braid situation. We're just going to keep tying all the
We're
ends
filling
up.
each other this one. So she did work for the AFL-CIO and the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, so the AWOC, for which she was the secretary treasurer. So the CSO founder, Fred Ross, said that she should meet a like-minded colleague, executive director Cesar Chavez. So Cesar
Yeah.
Chavez is very, very popular for the
Famous.
Chicano movement. He's very famous. He's a wonderful activist and leader for people that represent me. He did a good job. And I feel like people know who Cesar is, so I'm going to mainly concentrate on Dolores.
Yeah.
But she did meet Cesar. The two discovered that they shared a common vision, and that was organizing farm workers. They worked together to bring rural labor issues to the attention of the more urban-oriented CSO. When they could not pick up the interest of the CSO in expanding that focus, they left the group, and they decided to devote their time organizing the overlooked segment of American society, which is this Mexican immigrant society.
Farm workers.
Farm workers. In 1962, from their base in a town called Delano, which is still in California, they changed the course of the agricultural and labor history in California when they founded the National Farm Workers Association, which is the NFWA, the precursor to the United Farm Workers, which
Yeah.
is huge.
It's huge.
It's huge. Dolores said that she was able to get an inside look on how farm workers were living, and they were by far the most poverty-stricken people. The farm workers were being paid next to nothing. They had no rights. They slept on the floors. Their furniture was wooden boxes. They had no clean water, no access to bathrooms.
Ugh.
They would work from sunrise to sundown, no breaks, no medical care. They were slaves, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Basically.
And they're, farms were getting away with that.
Absolutely.
And they still do.
They do.
The whole outbreak of listeria or whatever for the lettuce was because farm workers were having to shit in the fields.
Mm.
That's in 2018, people. They weren't
Not
providing
allowed.
bathroom breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't providing porta potties.
Mm-mm.
So farm workers would have to shit in the fields.
Yeah.
And of course that infects our food.
They were also, the farm workers were working in extremely hazardous pesticides.
Oh,
That
gross,
has been a detriment to people for decades of illness and deformities in birth
Cancers.
and cancers. A lot of
Some of that stuff actually stays in. It actually infects your genes. It'll be passed
will
down in when you have
mutate your
children.
Yeah.
Because I read an article about a woman who was every one of her babies kept she kept miscarrying or they were being born with some kind of brain problem. And it was because when she was pregnant the first time, they had bugs or something in their house. They'd had it fumigated.
Oh.
And it had infected her blood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was being passed down every single time she got pregnant. It's terrible.
A lot of my family were migrant farm workers. That's what my grandparents did. My mother was a migrant farm worker. She actually lived in a labor camp when she was a child. My uncles worked in the fields, and a lot of my mom's family is very sick. lot of cancer, a lot of my grandpa died of cancer, and it's really affecting our family. I don't know what's passed down to me, so hopefully not a whole lot, but it happens, and it's abhorrent. These are human beings.
Yeah. Our country has not done a good job.
No.
In a lot of ways.
And so I can imagine her being, and I mean, I grew up in this environment as well. I saw these people, I did not grow up wanting, there was times where, we were a little hungry, and when we went without, but we never went without a bed. We never went without fucking bathroom, like nothing like that. But I remember seeing kids in my town that did not have shoes, that their clothes were filthy and they were torn and just downright dirt poor.
Yeah.
And seeing that stuff affects you, and it does make you want to do something. And my parents too, they have done a lot. My mother is a huge advocate. So is my father. My father actually worked for the USDA. It's like
and he was appointed by
Barack Obama. And so this story, like, that's why I spent so much time on her parents, because my parents were like that. And I feel like it really has influenced me in the way that I think in what I want to see my society look like.
Mm-hmm. I think this podcast is like your destiny.
Amanda's been holding my hand to help me find my destiny.
That is so not true. Yeah. I asked her to join me. I had this idea for the podcast, and I really wanted Rita to join me. I feel like, so Rita's always been, especially with the election of Donald Trump, she was like, I want to do something. I want to feel like I want to feel like I'm doing something to make the world better. And it's hard when you're not wealthy. So you can't like give money to things.
No.
And you have a child and a husband, and you're working all the time. Like, what can you do? Well, you can give creatively and creative energy. And I think that's what you're doing here, and fulfilling the destiny of your family as like these change makers. Yeah.
That's why the story just hits me so
I
close to the heart. I know I was doing the research, and this I felt close to and motivated. Not saying that I don't feel close to the other ones, but this one definitely is part of my identity.
Yeah, I think it parallels your life experiences and your parents and your grandparents' life experiences.
Yeah, that's why it didn't like her working all those jobs, and the kids at the restaurant. My family owned a restaurant when I was a child, and we were all freaking there. Cousins, aunties, uncles, all the kids were helping out. I remember sitting there and just like eating chips and salsa for hours because I had to sit there and do my homework because my mother was working.
Yeah.
And my father was working. My parents had multiple jobs all the time. I don't ever remember them having like one. Yeah. And it's just, and so when I was reading this, I was like, oh yeah, that's what we do. That's what Latinos do. Yeah. We're not lazy. Yeah. So many of these workers would travel where the crops were in season. I think a lot of people know like migration worker patterns. This meant too that their children didn't have proper education. Mm-hmm. They would oftentimes work in the fields with their parents. She explained that many of the women were also too sexually assaulted.
Yes.
They were raped by other men who were working alongside them, and they were mainly raped by the landowners.
By white overseers.
Yes. Because
that's a familiar refrain in the history of America as well.
Yes. They were afraid to speak up because you'd lose your job.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's just another way to be used, another way to be treated like you're not a human being. And these landowners would justify themselves by saying we're doing them a favor by giving them a job. So like, you're just lucky to be here.
They're doing you a favor, motherfucker, because who would pick your goddamn crops?
Exactly.
Oh, fuck you.
So Dolores sees these conditions that people are living in, and she explained that laws need to be passed. Yes. This has to be a legal thing for these people to be treated fairly, which is why she worked hard and put constant pressure to get laws passed. She was a huge lobbyist. With the help of the organization, she helped champion for the rights of workers in the agricultural fields to ensure that they were well paid and worked in better conditions. Chavez and her were dynamic leaders. He was a wonderful speaker. If you've ever seen Cesar Chavez speak, or her, they're both very eloquent and very powerful. like really
Yeah.
motivating.
Charismatic.
Yeah. She was a skilled organizer and a tough negotiator. That's what they called her.
I love her.
Little seven tongues there. The two did not always get along, though, and they admitted that. There was infamous blowout fights between her and Chavez, but she called it a natural process to a working relationship, and she viewed this as a healthy and necessary part of the growth process of any worthwhile collaboration. I like that she embraces, like, the fieriness of it. You're not always going to be, you know, surrounded by rainbows and butterflies. Sometimes shit's going to get heated and you're not always, but do you quit?
Yeah.
Or do you continue to work together and get things done?
And also understanding that, like, you can disagree on one thing and still be working towards a similar vision overall.
Mm-hmm. And I like that. I like that they were able to work together, just like that community. It's like they were doing well because they were working together.
And they were lifting each other up.
Yeah.
Here's the ladder.
So her first testament to her lobbying and negotiating talents were demonstrated by securing aid for dependent families, the AFDC, and disability insurance for farm workers in the state of California in 1963. This had never been done before.
No.
Like them getting care, it's like unheard of. She was instrumental in the union's success in the strikes against the California grape growers in the 60s and 70s. That's like her biggest accomplishment. So could you imagine trying to rally people to strike against grapes in California?
In the 60s?
In the 60s?
Yeah.
Exactly. Height of wine, mainly. Yeah. And I was surprised. I didn't know. It was extremely violent, these strikes. They were out there picketing in and striking in the fields, and people were gassing them. They were putting guns in their face.
Oh my God.
They were getting violent and abusive, and people just wanted basic living wages, conditions, and rights.
Basic shit.
And that is a huge monster to go up against, the grapes in California. And there was a poster I found that was boycott grapes, and it was like, it looked like an Aztec warrior, and it's holding the grapes and it's squeezing them, but blood is running through its fingers.
I have seen that poster.
Isn't that a fantastic poster? We're going to include that.
Yeah, we definitely
website.
need to put that on the...
It's beautiful.
Lucas, make a note.
We should have like a bell.
Ding,
and no
ding.
belt. Ding, ding.
Oh, by the way, listeners, our new editor is our friend Lucas McIntyre, who's very skilled and talented, and we're excited to have him on board.
Shout out to Lucas.
He's also a musician, so he's real good at sound. So thank you for making us sound good and taking out all of our garbage.
I haven't burped today.
Or said, my armpits smell like weed.
Not today. She was instrumental in the union's success in the strikes against the grape growers in the 60s and 70s. This initiative to go against the big grape took 5 years.
Jesus.
I know. It took 5 years for the UFW to achieve the signing of a historic agreement with 26 grape growers that improved the working conditions for the farm workers, included reducing the use of harmful pesticides, providing unemployment and health care benefits. She even caught the eye of Gloria Steinem with this story, and she gathered support from other feminists to also challenge, just if she didn't want to challenge, one more thing.
Yeah, just take on another mantle.
The gender discrimination within the farm workers movement.
Yes.
Because even in the movement, she was struggling herself to be a voice and have a platform.
Yeah.
And so she's like, hey, what the fuck? I'm working for ya, with ya.
Yeah, respect me.
She was even acknowledged by Robert F. Kennedy with her help in winning his 1968 California Democratic president primary. Because what she did was she advocated to her people about this man. Yes. And yeah, when we come out in droves. We get people elected.
Hopefully
Obama.
we get people unelected too.
Yes.
In the next election.
That's right. It's like, you got to light that fire under people's asses. Come on, people. Register.
Yeah.
Get out there. One of my greatest achievements. I got one person to vote that wasn't going to vote.
Oh,
I was so excited.
oh my God, you deserve you deserve something very special. I will take you out to dinner or something.
He was
for
very
that.
young, and he was just like, "Mom, my vote doesn't count." I was like, "No, no, no!" And I like talked his ear off, and then he came to work and was like, "Hey, I did something today." And I turned around and I go, "Oh, you voted?" And he goes, "Yes." I was like, "Awesome! Please do it." So in the 1970s, Dolores coordinated a national lettuce boycott, which was called the Salad Bowl, which I really like, and helped create the political climate for the passage of the 1975 Agricultural Labor Relations Act, the first law to recognize the rights of farm workers to bargain collectively. And that even affected, like, we're a huge ag state here in Washington.
Yeah, we are.
And that made a big difference in the lives of people that I know here, which is amazing. And too, around the time that this is happening, the 1960s and 70s, my mom and dad, it's 1969, my mom and dad are 18 years old. My mom and dad are only 3 months apart, by the way, so they're exactly the same age. And I remember my dad talking about this and what a joy it was to watch Latinos getting fired up and getting things done and being activists and creating a movement. And my father moved to Seattle and he became an activist there.
Yeah.
And my parents have always been very politically and socially motivated. And I think it's seeing stuff like that when you're young.
I think so too. I think being
It sticks with
18
you.
in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. There's a war going on.
Oh my
There's
God, there was so much
change
happening, and it was happening because young people were getting out there
Mm-hmm.
and refusing to step aside and be quiet. And I think we're having that same thing happen right now.
Mm-hmm.
When those Parkland kids came out after the shooting of their high school,
That's right.
and all of those kids from all over the March for Our Lives, just in general,
Mm-hmm.
was organized by all of these teens across the country. Like the kids from Parkland went to Chicago and stuff and talked to, I mean, it just, that whole thing, like they have been so moving to watch,
Mm-hmm. Inspirational.
so inspirational. And I think that we're seeing something so similar happen to what was, I can only imagine, like if I had been 18, instead of 18 in 2001, if I'd been 18 in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
and the things I would be a witness to and a participant in would be so life affirming and
Mm-hmm.
life changing. So for your parents to have grown up at this time and all of these incredible things are happening across the country for civil rights, for farm workers' rights, for women's rights, I mean, that really shapes who you become.
It does. Around this time, too, she was credited with coining the phrase "si se puede," which I remember hearing in school when I was like in 7th and 6th grade. My teacher would always say it. And it means, yes, you can. And so he would make us chant it. Like he would make us say it.
What a cool teacher.
I know. He was very, very cool. Shout out to Mr. Mendez. We would even he was my basketball coach and he would do our basketball plays. He would have us do, you call out like Blue 52 or something like in football or basketball. He would have us shout out like Aslan or like things like in Spanish or Aztec. And we always thought it was so dorky, but I see what he was doing now.
Oh my God. Now you're looking back and you're like, that's subversive motherfucker.
I know, you got in there. And I love that. Yes, we can. It means pushing the members onward through tough times.
Yep.
She began a relationship with Richard Chavez, who was Cesar's brother. I did not know that. These two didn't get married. She was like, no
She's like,
ring.
I'm done with
that. They did happen to have 4 more children.
Oh my God.
I
How
know.
many children is that now?
She's got 11. Mexicano. We know how to make babies.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's a lot of babies.
Now, one of my favorite quotes from I love Sonia Cisneros, one of her books, which is one of my favorite books, House on Mango Street. Which she
Sandra
says,
Cisneros.
Oh, sorry, Sandra Cisneros. She says, Latinas have hips because you got to have something to hold the babies.
House on Mango Street, so good.
So good. So yeah, I'm kind of glad she didn't marry this one. I don't know. She just kind of found her rhythm. But yeah, they stayed together.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah. She was not shy having the babies. As an advocate for farm workers' rights, Dolores was arrested 22 times for participating in nonviolent disobedient activities and strikes. which I like that. She was always an advocate for nonviolence.
Yes.
You do more with that than you do with aggression. And she often would have her own families at the strikes. I mean, this was a very dangerous spot to be.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of stuff that was out of control. But she was like, we're not acting that way. She would bring her own family to advocate. We're not going there.
Yeah.
At age 58, she suffered a life-threatening assault.
What?
Yeah. She was protesting against the policies of presidential candidate George Bush in San Francisco when a cop assaulted her. He took his baton.
Wait, what year?
This was when George Bush was a presidential candidate. So
yeah, I thought you said 50. No, she was age 58.
She was age 58.
Okay, I was thinking 1958. So that must have been like 88.
Yes. He broke 6 of her ribs and he shattered her spleen. She had to have emergency surgery to remove her spleen. Public outrage, I know, resulted from the assault. The San Francisco Police Department, she sued them, got an out-of-court settlement, but it pushed the police department to change its policies regarding crowd control and police discipline.
Yeah, like...
So,
and that actually probably is working in San Francisco, but in other places that shit is not working.
No. But I'm like, your lady sued. And I was thinking to myself, my lady sued too.
Yeah, we got lawsuits. We're going for reparations.
But that's like, it's terrible what happened to her. She got something out of it though.
Yeah.
She's like, this isn't going down this way. Following a lengthy recovery, she took a leave of absence from the union to focus on women's rights. So she's taking a break, but she's not taking a break. She traversed the country for 2 years on behalf of the feminist majority's feminization of power. 50-50 by the year 2000 campaign encouraged Latinas to run for office.
Good.
I know. The campaign resulted in a significant increase in the number of women representatives at the local, state, and federal levels. She also served as a national chair of the 21st Century Party, founded in 1992, on the principles that women make up 52% of the party's candidates and that officers must reflect the ethnic diversity of the nation.
Good.
So advocating again for diversity. As she mended, she slowly went back to work for the UFW. The current president of the UFW said this about Dolores. Early in 1970, Cesar Chavez said Dolores is totally fearless, both physically and mentally. A quarter of a century later, she shows no sign of slowing down. She is an enduring symbol of the farm worker movement.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I know. So in 2002, Dolores received the Puffin Nation $100,000 prize for creative citizenship. She used this to establish the Dolores Huerta Foundation. It's a grassroots community organization. Camilla, Dolores' youngest daughter, serves as executive director of the DHF since its inception, and Dolores is the president. She remains active with her foundation, is a full-time unpaid volunteer there. Which I think is awesome. She's like, I'm not taking any money. She sees the work of the foundation as a continuation of the nonviolent civil rights movement of the 1970s. The DHF has implemented its organizing model in 6 rural communities in California, or Central California. So it started with 1, moved on to 6 different sects. In these communities, full-time trained organizers form neighborhood organizations called Vecinos Unidos, which is United Neighbors. These neighborhood residents, the vecinos, are trained to collectively engage public officials and navigate the system for the benefit of their communities, which I love. So one of the things, my father was a housing developer, and one of the things that he would do with all of his projects is he would create a community center in the center of the housing. They had computers. The kids had access to learning English, ESL classes, but also they would have meetings as a community of how to make sure to keep it clean, how to deal with if they were having a situation, outreach, legal outreach as well.
Yeah.
So it was, we're going to unite and organize and help each other. And I always thought that that was amazing that they were able to include that with these housing developments because it was migrant farm worker housing.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. It was low-income migrant farm worker housing. There was a couple of times like he would go and visit like the people that moved in, and he would meet people and families. And I remember him coming home one time, and he was like, there's like a family of 6, and he said they had nothing. They had a mattress. And that was it. But they were happy because they had a roof. And I asked him one time, like, what is it, why push so hard for migrant farm worker housing? And he said it's a right. It's a basic fundamental right to have a home and to be, a human right to have a home and be safe at work, have medical care. And it was just, it was no question for my parents. It's like, no, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah, you come from a long line of real good people.
Yes. My mother, too, right now works for an immigration law firm. She's not slowing down. I think my dad, like, quote unquote, retired. He didn't retire. He didn't. So I went through some of her awards and her dedications because she received quite a bit.
Yes, I imagine.
She received the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award from President Clinton in 1998. She received Miss Magazine's one of the 3 most important women of 1997. Ladies' Home Journal 100 Most Important Women of the 20th Century. She was inducted into the California Hall of Fame. She won the Labor Leader Award, the Kern County Woman of the Year Award from California State Legislature, the Ottilia Award from the Mexican government. She won the James Smithsonian Award from the Smithsonian Institution.
Wow.
She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame.
Yes.
She was honored by 9 different universities with honorary doctorates.
PhDs.
Yes. And including
I want to get one of those. I want to get an
I
honorary
want
PhD
one. Me
so
too.
that I don't have to actually do the work.
Colleges including Princeton.
Wow.
I know. She was awarded the UCLA Medal, UCLA's highest honor. She was an honorary chair of Democratic Socialists of America and currently serves on the board of directors of Equality in
Which
California.
we're going to circle back, and that's where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is.
Yep. Paving the way, y'all. And in 2012, President Obama awarded her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Which is like the highest civilian honor in the United States.
Highest civilian honor in the U.S. Upon receiving this award, Dolores said, "The freedom of association means that people can come together in organization to fight for solutions to the problems they confront in their communities. The great social justice changes in our country have happened when people come together, organized, and took direct action. It is this right that sustains and nurtures our democracy today. The civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the equality movement for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are all manifestations of these rights. I thank President Obama for raising the importance of organizing to the highest level of merit and honor." Ugh, I cried, okay? I cried.
She's like near tears right now.
I am. She can see it. This woman just, I had known of her, but doing this, I really know her now, and I love it. She's also an honorary co-chair for the Women's March on Washington the day after What's-His-Face got elected. I don't like saying his name.
He who shall not be named.
I made a secret promise to myself that I would never call him my president and that I will not refer to him to that name because he doesn't deserve it.
Yeah. I usually just call him Trump.
Yeah, me too. Or just,
Fuckface?
I try to not do that in front of my kid because I don't want him to have that type of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I just I will not call him president. We just say, Trump or dump or whatever, Cheeto face.
Cheetolini.
Yeah. So a quote from her that I ended on was, "As long as I have the energy and health, I'm going to do as much as I can." And she's doing it. And I like that. It's like freaking 103 years old over there.
Yeah. Yep. Olivia Hooker was 103.
And she's still alive. Yes. She's still in California. There is a documentary that I watched called Dolores, directed by Peter Pratt. It was made in 2017. I highly recommend it. It's really good. There was also a Hollywood movie called Chavez. which Rosario Dawson
that's
played
right.
her. That was a really good one. And the guy that, I forget that Latino's name, but the actor that plays Cesar Chavez, he's wonderful.
Who plays him?
Oh, I don't know his name. He was just in the new season of Narcos, if you watch Narcos at all.
No, I don't.
I don't remember his name. I can look it up, though.
Yeah, I was like, was it Benjamin Bratt?
No.
Okay. Because I think he played Chavez.
I think he did, too.
Some
in
other
another
time then.
Yeah. I think he also played did he play Che Guevara? Maybe. I don't know. We're just talking out of our ass right now.
Though.
Oh, God, but it's tasty. So my information I got from Britannica.com, the Smithsonian.com, biography.com, and your dictionary. DoloresHuerta.org. That is where her foundation is located. So if you want more information on what she's advocating for lately, and there's a lot of links to other amazing women that are doing amazing things and things that you can contribute to.
Yeah, but you can donate as well to her foundation if you want to support her work.
So that is www.doloreshuerta.org. I also got some information from NBC.news and from Wikipedia.
Nice.
And that's my gal.
Well, that was a long one, but a good one.
I know. I had 9 pages of information. Oh, but I was feeling this girl. Oh, I really, really liked this one. This one was a good one.
Well, I could tell you had, a deep personal connection to it. So I think it's always helpful when you have a personal connection to one of the people. You really feel compelled to do a good job at representing their life.
I did. I felt like I didn't want to mess it up. But if I did, if anybody's out there like, well, you didn't mention her, she didn't, just go ahead. I'm more than willing to know more about her. Yeah.
We have officially launched as of the recording of this podcast. So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at IDK Her Podcast. If you want to email us with suggestions for people to do or corrections you'd like us to make, you can find us at idon'tknowherpodcast@gmail.com.
And I'm sure we'll have some. We are not perfect.
Yeah. And we also have a website, idkher.com.
Check it out, folks.
If you ever want to just hashtag, it's hashtag IDKher, so that that's how you can get our attention. We'll definitely be checking that hashtag. We would love to hear from you guys.
Absolutely.
And give us some suggestions for future podcast episodes. And we really appreciate the fact that you're listening to our stories.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Stuff's important to us.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's important to you too.
Obviously, if you're listening, it must be. You're a smart person.
Yeah.
Keep coming back for more.
And go watch Juice.
Have a great day, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys.